Good evening. Tonight we're going to answer an important question. Is this Woodstock, the soundtrack to the movie, is this classic live album the greatest live album ever made? That would be a pretty bold statement because there have been some great live albums and some great concerts. At the end of this video, I'll give my take on that. But tonight we're going to talk as a sort of a classic album review about the album Woodstock. Of course, it accompanied the movie. But we're going to talk about it as a live album. When you could go buy a live album, this is a live album, and we're going to talk about it tonight. Woodstock, the live album. Okay, this is the live album. I've got the vinyl. I've had about 5 copies of this record over the years. And I decided I wanted another one. I've just lost every one. I hope I don't lose this one. And I ordered it off eBay. I think I paid $20 for it. But there's the classic, iconic live album cover. And just take a moment before we even talk about the album to consider the awesomeness of vinyl. When you hear older people, I hope I'm not in that category. Some of you might think I am. But when you hear people talk about vinyl records and some of the things they miss about them, other than possibly the audio quality and the warmth of records and everything. But one of the things that doesn't seem that debatable is the sort of total package of art, photography, information, and sort of the whole album as an entirety. Look at that classic live album there with that couple. I think they think they know who that couple is. I guess it's kind of disputed. But all the trash, that's a side of Woodstock. And then you've got Joan Baez, Butterfield Blues Band. That's the different artists that appeared on the album, which was only a portion of the show, of course, August 1969. But let's look at this album. That's the front cover. That's the back. That's the Garden of Eden right there. That's Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, naked and unashamed. That's Filippini Pond, I believe, was the name of the pond, and they were naked and unashamed, and it was notable enough that made the back of the album cover. I think that kind of summarizes something about the Woodstock concert, is just that all the rules of normal society kind of went out the window for a few days, and that's probably as much its attraction as much as anything else. Okay, let's open up the album. It was a triple album set, so you can see the front. Then on the back, you see the cover information. I think the picture of them naked in the pond is actually in the inside cover, but that's the back. You can see all the concert listings there. Joan Baez, Arlo Guthrie, Country Joe and the Fish, Richie Havens, John Sebastian, Joe Cocker. Started out kind of folksy, got rockier as the evening went. This part right here, we can't read it verbatim, but it says something like, here you can see, technical flaws resulting from equipment failure as well as human overload are inevitable in a venture of this size. Just as inevitably, some of them occur in the material included in this album. Consider them like the scars in fine leather, proof of the origin and authenticity of the material in which they are found. I always thought that was kind of cool. And it reminds me that back in those days, a live album was really live music. The bands didn't try to just necessarily play just like the record, which is almost kind of expected today. And it was so cool. And yeah, sometimes you hear mistakes, or the sound quality wouldn't be that good. Maybe someone's harmony would be a little off, and but that is a lot of, if the music was good overall, it added to the feeling like you were there. I mean, it was so cool. These live albums were so great back then, and they didn't have YouTube, so yeah, it was awesome. Okay, now let's open up the album in all its glory. Just imagine being a 15-year-old in 1971, opening that album and seeing that huge panoramic shot of the crowd, 500,000 people from the stage. Let me write the songs of a people, and I care not who writes its laws. Look at that. You could see why Woodstock captured the imagination. A lot of people were there. Said it was rainy. I know some people were there. Said they remember it being rainy and uncomfortable, hungry, tired. But you could see how it lived on as a mythic event. Look at that. Look at those people on the stage. How'd you like to be on that stage? Awesome. Well, there are a lot of things we could say about this. This is a triple album. It was the soundtrack to a movie. You know, and in some ways, it's kind of one of those interesting situations where the movie, in a way, was what elevated it to the status it has today. Not that it wasn't famous when it happened, but the movie circulated in all these midnight shows back then, and that made the show famous. But it was in August 1969, and one of the things I wanted to say about it, it was very eclectic. I don't think music was as categorized. They didn't have as many business people telling people what category to put everything in. So you had people like Sha Na Na, Joan Baez. She sang Amazing Grace. She sang the Ballad of Joe Hill. You had John Sebastian. Richie Havens famously began it. You know, Freedom. And there was an art festival associated with it too. But in this album, you know, it has that element that nobody said, oh, you can't put Joan Baez on an album with Jimi Hendrix. Oh, gee, you know, or Sha Na Na, really, with Joe Cocker. You got to be kidding me. Nobody said that. I mean, at least not out loud, or you know. And it's just a great mix of the music of the day. And I think today we often remember the hard rock and it is a rock album. But there was definitely a folk element there. I mean, particularly the earlier part of the festival was very folk oriented, and that's awesome. And it just showed the eclectic nature of the music of the time and of that festival. This album includes stage announcements. I don't think they'd put these stage announcements on here today, like, hey, don't take the brown acid, you know, famously. I guess that was good advice back in those days, and apparently, you know, and you have crowds chanting "rain, rain," you know, and Max Yasgur, the guy who owned the farm that was on, came and talked on stage. That's this. So you know what this is? It's great music, but it's a total package. It's an audio recording of an event. It's almost like going back to the days of radio. You could put this on and you were kind of at the concert, and there was, unless you saw the film in the theater, there wasn't a visual to it. So you were listening to it like you were at the concert. And yeah, it was almost like radio, and it's great. Well, what about the overall music? Well, you have some great performances on here as you get into what I guess we might call classic rock, because this is sort of one of the defining moments in the birth of classic rock, or the sort of as classic rock really came to the fore. And you've got, you know, Joe Cocker, just a fantastic performance of Little Help from My Friends. Carlos Santana, who was kind of young and new at the time. You've got The Who. Of course, famously, you got Jimi Hendrix. Did a performance, you know. I've heard people say Hendrix was already kind of a shell of his former self at Woodstock. I don't know if that's true. He plays great, but he gets there, and it's a historic appearance of Hendrix anyway. Another great performance on this is Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and I, you know, never ever underestimate. They were so good, and they get up there and do Sweet Judy Blue Eyes, and it's so neat because you can really hear them do it live, you know. And you realize how good they were, their harmonies, and you can hear it's live. I mean, you can kind of hear the jangle of the acoustic guitars and that weird tuning Stephen Stills uses in that song. It's like E, 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 B, E, or something like that. And it sounds awesome, but it makes the strings kind of ring in a weird way. You kind of hear everything jangle because you have all those open strings, and but you can hear it. It's just, you know, it's really neat. And Neil Young's there. Alvin Lee gets up there and does a good song 10 years after he does I'm Going Home. Song's kind of long, frankly, but and it's a 3-chord blues song. He didn't do I'd Love to Change the World or some of the other stuff. But one thing about his song, it's got a great intro 12-bar solo. Whatever else you think about, you know, it goes on quite long. as music often did back then. But it's got a great intro solo. So, and another standout performance on this album was Sly Stone. And, that's another example where you had Joan Baez, or people you might categorize as folk, and you might not associate them with Jimi Hendrix. They're all at the same show. Well, Sly Stone was rock. He was very popular with hard rock audiences at that time. And yet, you might hear his music too on urban stations or stations that were appealed to African Americans. I guess soul music, which was in a great period as you moved into the late 60s and 70s, R&B and soul. And he, those categories didn't seem to matter as much. I think how wonderful that would be, huh? Yeah. Sly Stone is a show stealer almost. He gets up and says, "I want to take you higher," and it's in the night, and it's a great night, and he's everybody's still there, nobody's left yet. It's a killer. I mean, I hope he's doing well now, but whatever else happened to him after that, just can you imagine being up there, 500,000 people. Must have been just a life-altering experience. So yeah, the music on this album is good. It's good. It's a historic event. It's it's a cultural touchstone and all that. But you know what else? It's good music. There's some good music on this album. Some great music on this album. I've got this channel. I don't know if anyone watches it, but one of these days I'm going to do a ranking of the 10 best live albums. And if you're watching now, maybe I'm going to give it away. But I've decided this would be the best live album ever, and that includes a lot of great live albums. The Last Waltz, pretty different live albums, but you think of really classic live albums, Kiss Alive, Frampton Comes Alive. Whether you like Kiss or not, I mean, that's a great live album, and it's, and there were a lot of great live albums, and Gimme Shelter by the Stones. But to me, this is the greatest live album. I mean, and it, to be a great live album, I think it's not just enough to have a good night. Because how many concerts were there ever where it was great and you just walked away, and today no one remembers it, Maybe some people were there, but it has to capture the moment. And I think with the film and how many people were there, and the Vietnam War was going on, what the Woodstock Festival meant, you put all that together, plus just really terrific music, and such a variety of music. It wasn't just a band. It was the music of a generation. It was everything from Baez to Sly Stone to Hendrix to The Who. And some bands weren't on this album. The Dead. There were other bands at the festival, and I think there's a Woodstock 2 album. But I think for all those reasons, first and foremost, because it's a great music album. I mean, just as a musical album, the music at this show was terrific. But I think when you add in what it was, and part of what makes the music great is the spirit of the event comes through. It sort of was captured by the bands in that kind of intangible but very essential way, that audience, the time, the year, the summer, all those people there, all that comes through in the music. And just the way it's grown to such a larger-than-life status over all these decades since. It's 50 years, right, since this concert, 51 years. Yeah, it's, I feel like in some ways it's not that close. And I say that with a lot of great live albums I love, maybe some live albums I've listened to more. But I just think when you put all those things together, this was the greatest live album. Not just great, it was a great festival. They had a lot of festivals at that time, Janis Joplin, there's a movie of Janis Joplin called Festival Express, and it was on a train, but the idea was we're going to have a kind of a Woodstock in every city, and they were all on a train. But it's the same thing. But this is the one that really captured the attention, and it's
It's the best concert album ever made. You've been hearing some clips of a song I wrote called The Freakout Tent at Woodstock, and I hope you'll listen to the thing in its entirety now. It's a tribute to the Freakout Tent at Woodstock. And one of the cool things about Woodstock was it was so organized. They didn't sell any T-shirts. There were no cops. I think, you know, they had a commune. Some guys from the Wavy Gravy and the Hog Farm kind of provided security and some administration. They served the concession stand out of big garbage cans. I don't think they'd let you get away with that today. But the first aid tent was the Freakout tent, which was kind of in that spirit. Not exactly a state-of-the-art, you know, mid-20th century medicine, but the spirit was there to, you know, to help people in various states of psychological distress. So they had a first aid station, which was affectionately dubbed the Freakout tent. And I wrote this song. It's called the Freakout Tent, and it's sort of a tribute to the Freakout tent idea, which is sort of humorous if you think about it, but also just what that festival was and the spirit and the freedom that it represents to our country. It's a precious thing. By Friday afternoon, there were people out to see. 300,000 by 3:15. The Garden Parkway closed and all the big bands were delayed. So Richie Havens grabbed a guitar and he played. And that's just when the first one came on by. He must have been at least a fathom high. In the Freakout tent at Woodstock with the music all around, people came to see us for a little calming down. We'd look them in the eye and tell them everything's okay in that old Freakout tent in Woodstock, USA. The next day in the Freakout tent, it started like it should. The brown stuff, we were told, was not specifically too good. Country Joe, he led a cheer about a war in someplace new, and 500,000 said it right on cue. And all the while they kept on coming by. They must have been at least a fathom high. In the Freakout tent at Woodstock, in the sun and in the shade, people came to see us when they needed some first aid. We'd put them in a folding chair to hear the music play in that old Freakout tent at Woodstock, USA. We never sold a T-shirt or had cops out on patrol. Back before the corporations ruined rock and roll. Back before the lawyers shut us down. When music was the only game in town. In the Freakout tent at Woodstock back in August '69, people came to see us and we'd tell them things were fine. To take a breath and think about the coolness of the day in that old Freakout tent in Woodstock, USA. After it was over, we looked back and then beyond. We thought about Jimi Hendrix and of swimming in the pond. And then we thought of Altamont and those kids at Kent State U. Now if you were there, I wonder what you'd do. And now it seems they never come on by. Could that be a touch of sadness in your eye? To that old Freakout tent at Woodstock, sometimes I wish I could still go, where no one told us what to do or how to run the show. And the long strange trip that we've been on has lasted many a day in that old Freakout tent in Woodstock, USA. From 3 days of love and music back at Woodstock, USA.